This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, a weekly reality check on sensible investing and financial decision-making for Canadians. We are hosted by me, Benjamin Felix, and Cameron Passmore.
And this week's guest was phenomenal. So I started in the business back in 1991, and I used to read religiously every article from Jonathan Chevreau because he was a financial reporter in the Financial Post. So I used to see his little picture, the little black and white picture in the Post every day. I would read him, and he put out regular articles as well as regular mutual fund guides, and he's written many books. So we had him on this week, and I thought he was absolutely fascinating.
Oh, he was great. Just his insights on financial independence alone were valuable, but his industry history and insights were also awesome.
So he's the founder of Findependence Hub, which is, they call it North America's gateway to financial independence. And it's an interesting mix of habits, frugality, living the life you want to live, how to invest. It's a real neat collection of articles on all kinds of different subjects in that area. He still writes, what did he say? A few articles a month for the Globe and Mail, the Financial Post, as well as Money Sense, I believe.
Yep. Yeah, but his angle on retirement is that's kind of his big thing that he's been pushing for is you shouldn't aim to retire. You should aim to have what he calls a victory lap, where you maybe slow down and work a little bit less, or only work on things that you really enjoy doing, but know that you don't have to actually do anything to work. So it's like, well, it's what people talk about where you're financially independent, but his whole message is financial independence, but still being extremely engaged in things that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, real pleasure to chat with him. So a lot of value from Jonathan.
Yeah, it was a good episode. Here you go. John, welcome to the Rational Reminder Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So when I mention retirement, a lot of people that I talk to these days immediately respond by saying that they don't see themselves retiring or they don't ever want to retire. Do you think that the perception of retirement is changing?
Well, for sure. I think part of the thing is longevity. I have a friend who's 102 and she still lives on her own, for example. And she worked till, 97, just to give you an idea. So,
wow.
But the average person, we still have this kind of full stop retirement thing. This goes back to the days of defined benefit plans. It's sort of like the gold watch at 65. And you're going completely from full go to full stop suddenly. And I think that idea is changing. There's something I call the glide path to retirement, where you sort of kind of go gradually. The analogy I use is if you're flying from California to Toronto, the plane doesn't start to descend when you hit Pearson, and it descends to 30,000 feet in a few moments. Obviously, you start to slow down. You start to, maybe the pilot starts to lower his altitude around Lake Michigan or something like that. And then after half an hour, eventually you touch down smoothly. I think that analogy holds up in retirement. In fact, my wife, who's just a year younger, 64, has just started her glide path, this effective 2-3 weeks ago, going down to a 3-day week. And she hopes to take in for a landing around June when she turns 65.
I've got to ask, what was your friend doing until age 97?
Well, she was a kind of part-time bookkeeper for a company, which was a graphics kind of company. Now, during her main career, which she thought she retired too early from at 65, I think she was at grocery, kind of a big chain. I forget the name of it, Metro. It's that kind of company. But yeah, she's still working 2 days a week.
Wow.
So. And in fact, she was driving. She was driving till the same age.
Jeez.
Well, yeah, of course, so was Prince Philip. Let's not go there.
So, John, you co-authored a book called The Victory Lap Retirement with your co-author, Mike Track. Can you talk about that, since I believe you're in this stage of your life that you are entering the Victory Lap Retirement?
Yeah. Personally, I call it semi-retirement. Some people might call it an encore career. If you've read the book Encore by Mark Friedman, encore.org in the States, this whole idea of I guess to me, it's really moving beyond employment, being a salary employee and becoming self-employed, pursuing your artistic dreams or whatever dreams they may be, for public speaking or to start your own business. The Victory Lap starts with the premise that you have reached financial independence. But as I often emphasize, financial independence and retirement aren't the same thing. You can be financially independent, as I am, but not retired, and I'm not retired. But the other way doesn't work. You can't be retired and not be financially independent. So these people who talk about retiring and they still have huge credit card debt and a big mortgage, it seems to me they're just fantasizing.
So you've moved into this victory lap where you're still working, even though you don't have to be working, and you've probably thought about this stage of life more than most people because you've written about it so much. Are there any unexpected challenges that you've noticed during the victory lap phase?
For me personally, not that much. And the reason is because I sort of had a trial run. If you ever saw, there was an artist from the 60s, Phil Oakes, and his album was called Rehearsals for Retirement. Unfortunately, there was a gravestone as the main cover image. But the point was that 30 years ago, I was a high-tech reporter instead of a financial reporter. I was at the Globe and Mail, young guy, and I quit after about 3.5 years. And I went freelance for about 3-4 years. But mind you, it was completely different circumstances because I was just a single guy, just renting an apartment. I was, worked for the 23rd floor of Young Jarvis and Bloor, somewhere that area. In that case, I was literally renting for rent, and I had no real cushion or safety cushion. This time around, apart from the fact the content had changed from technology to financials, I have A, the support of a wife who works, B, a paid-up mortgage, C, some fairly financial assets. So I thought, well, this should be relatively simple compared to the first time around, and it was. So to answer your question, no, it wasn't that much of a shock for me personally. I think it's a shock for people who, leave a big defined benefit plan at 65 and they haven't even thought what they're going to do with their time, because just because you're retired doesn't mean you don't still have 24 hours a day to fill. You can fill 8 of them with sleeping and 3 with TV, but that's about it.
Financial independence certainly sounds a lot better than, for example, suggesting a full stop retirement. Do you have any sense of when it is time to consider the full stop retirement, John?
Well, a full stop retirement, I say that happens you may not have any say in the matter. I mean, people say, oh, I love working, I'm going to work till I'm 75, so I don't need to worry about money and saving. Well, that's an illusion, because 2 things can happen. Your health can change, and 2, you may not always have a willing employer, and or if you're self-employed, willing clients that are going to fund your work forever strategy. So you have to assume that either health or your marketability is going to diminish, and that's probably between the classic 65 and 75. Now, I know a lot of people, journalists, even on staff still, who are working well into their 70s. But on the other hand, those who are self-employed do tend to slow down a bit. And again, to use my glide path analogy.
So what do you think about the FIRE movement, where it seems like people are trying to go nuts, saving as much as they can and potentially altering their current lifestyle in order to get to this magical, 30 or 40-year-old being financially independent or retired? What are your thoughts on the FIRE movement?
Okay, first of all, FIRE is just an acronym for FIRE, standing for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And, well, my observation is these FIRE people, it's a little crazy. Like, we could discuss how much you have to save for retirement. David Chilton, et cetera, will probably come up with figures between, save 10 and 20, 25% of your income. Whereas the FIRE people, they seem to save 50% of their income, but they're completely obsessed. They seem to I guess they hate their jobs so much, their corporate jobs, that they've got to be retired by 35 or 40. Well, that is a heck of a long time. If you're going to live to 90, 50 years is a long time to retire. And of course, as I think we've observed before, none of these FIRE people are actually retired. They've really just left the big corporation. That's what they mean. And what they really want to do is to run websites and to do public speaking and write books, and i.e. be self-employed, talking about FIRE and how they retired at 40, but none of them retired. They've just changed it to another gig. So to that extent, I'm a little skeptical about FIRE. I know there's a new site, I think in Europe, called Fire Hub, a little bit like Financial Independence Hub. I guess I should have called mine the Fire Hub. Too late for that, though.
I have another question for you, John, for people that have committed for perhaps sudden wealth, either through an inheritance or through perhaps stock options or something like that at a young age. Do you have any sense about what the challenges are for people that end up in that kind of situation? Because it is different than the people who, like the FIRE people, who got there through frugality. Do you have a sense of what their challenges might be?
Take a look at the news right now. I mean, here's Howard Schultz. He's my age, 65. He's worth some billions, the former, the founder of Starbucks or co-founder. And now what's he want to do? He wants to run for president. That tells you a lot. It's not just about money. I mean, Howard Schultz could have retired a long, long time ago. And there's many examples. I mean, I think, you could think of, Donald Trump. He's 72. He can afford to retire. He doesn't want to retire. How about in the arts, especially? Mick Jagger's still rocking at 70. I'm pretty sure he doesn't need the money. Why are these people still doing it? Well, that's what it tells you. It's not about the money. It's about routine, structure, purpose, having a vision, having dreams. I think a lot of people made sacrifices. Perhaps you got married and you had 3 kids, you got a big mortgage, and you sort of made a compromise. I mean, for example, I'm a journalist. I would have liked to be a novelist. Lots of journalists are secret closet novelists, but it's more practical. Nobody's going to give you a 40-hour-a-week job that pays their living salary to write novels. But you can write, you can be a reporter, you can be a columnist, and that's what people do. And you sort of put your dreams on hold. Other people may have decided they want to be an artist, or they want to be a symphony orchestra conductor, whatever the dream may be. So the beauty of Findependence is it gives you a second chance to say, okay, I'm no longer economically constrained. Now, what is it I really wanted to do with my life? And you may have to go right back to your childhood and say, yeah, gee, I used to play with paintbrushes and love doing sketches. Maybe that's what I should have done. So that's to me what Findependence is all about, and the Victory Lab.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially when you think about the data on sudden wealth and how when people do have windfalls like that, where they are all of a sudden financially independent, but they haven't thought about all of the things that you're talking about, they can often get into some real psychological trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a chapter in our book, I think Mike's portion, because there's some cartoons as well, saying, warning, boredom ahead. Personally, I've never been bored either when I was working or as an independent person. There's just an endless list of things to do. And it doesn't all have to be money-making, income-generating things. For me, there's a lot of exercise, health, nutrition. You get a chance to cook a little bit better, doing yoga, hockey, tennis, you name it. And even in the area of what you might consider to be work, even there's more volunteerism. You can work out at the church or the Rotary Club or whatever you want to do. The activities may be the same. You're just no longer obsessed with cutting invoices.
Can you talk about the importance of being on the same page as your spouse as you get into financial independence?
Well, that's hugely important. I belong to a Facebook group I co-founded called Younger Next Year 2019. It was 2018, but you can change the name, with a woman from Rochester named Vicky. And it's based on this New York Times bestselling book called Younger Next Year by 2 guys. One was basically an ex-corporate lawyer from New York and his young physician who ironically died, but that's another story. But the point that they make in Younger Next Year is that you want to be healthy for your, I would call it the Victory Lap years, but a huge thing is your partner. If you have a congenial partner in retirement, that's number one. It's nice to have a second pension instead of CPPs and OASs and all that and RSPs. But 2, somebody to spend the time with who's congenial. So to me, that's really huge. And probably if you're not getting along when you're working, both of you, you're going to get along less when you have nothing but time together. My wife said something like, I married you for life, not for lunch, which means you got to do your own thing as well. And what are you doing today? I'm going to lunch with so-and-so. Well, I'm going to go lunch with somebody else. See you at supper, babe.
So 30 years ago this month, we remember that David Chilton's famous book, The Wealthy Barber, came out. And in that, he made famous the pay yourself first concept of, save 10% of your salary. I know I've read some pieces that you've written about that, and I believe your number is a bit higher than that. Can you talk about, what sort of...
Well, I certainly agree with the idea of pay yourself first. That was a huge thing. And it's not that original. I mean, or other people have copied it. For example, The Automatic Millionaire, David Bax, got a whole bunch of books, pretty much the same idea. That makes sense. So the percentage, well, I think the percentage is a bit on the low side. I think you should start with the RSP, which you tell me, I believe it's 18% of earned income the previous year. So right off the bat, that's 18%, not 10%. And then you can add 6,000 TFSA. You might as well do that as well. So that gives you what? Another 3%, perhaps. If we're at 18, it would be a quarter, say 4 or 5 more. So we're getting close to 25%. Now that might be a little bit much for people who are still in debt, still paying down mortgages, educating the children. So if they can only afford 10 or 15, by all means. But once the debts are all gone and the frugal behavior that allowed you to get rid of those debts, you can start allocating more money, bigger percentage of your savings to wealth accumulation and all the good things that you guys would recommend, probably ETFs and stocks and bonds and GICs. You tell me.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Now, I know from your writing that one of the things that you did early on is paid off your mortgage. Can you just talk a little bit about how beneficial that was from a psychological perspective?
Yeah, it was huge. It's funny you talk about Chilton, because that was 1989, the year we got married, and then that's the year we bought our first house. And we had a couple friends who were about the same age, but they got married earlier, and they were quite into like paying down their mortgages. In fact, by the time we got hitched, because it was mid-30s, time was ticking, they'd already paid theirs. So we thought that would be great. Wouldn't life be great if you didn't have to either pay rent or a mortgage? So we did basically it was the 10% pay down thing, whatever you were allowed to do. So in our case, back then it was almost 12% interest rate. So you were motivated more than today to pay it down. And on 170,000 mortgages at the time, that meant every year we had to come up with 17 grand paid down directly on the principal. Because as you know, the rest of it was mostly just interest payments. So to answer your question, yeah, it was psychologically, it was really, really nice to pay off the mortgage. But what you discover is, well, that's great, but there's still a lot of other expenses, and you still want to accumulate enough wealth so that you don't have to be employed, period, if you don't want to. I think some people call it FU money. I'm not sure what it stands for.
So if we forget about the principal residence, I agree, paying off the mortgages is great. But if we think about other real estate, so investing in properties other than your own home as a source of income for wealth accumulation or financial independence, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I just did an in-depth report for the Motley Fool Canada on this very topic of investing in real estate. They didn't want to talk too much about the direct model, i.e. becoming a landlord and owning 2 or 3 duplexes or triplexes or commercial properties. It was more like, okay, you can have a principal residence, and now you just want to have a little bit of financial assets in real estate, i.e. probably ETFs of REITs, real estate investment trusts. And it turns out, if you look at somebody like David Swenson, who does, as you know, Yale's asset allocation recommendations and wrote a book called Unconventional Success, he's actually quite big on real estate as sort of the third big asset class. Like everybody knows stocks and bonds and maybe cash as the third, but real estate can get a little bit short shrift. What's his name? Swenson, I think he's basically 70-30 equities. Of the 70, I believe he was advocating for as much as 20% of the 70. You do the math, what's that, 14%, something like that, in REITs or REIT ETFs. So, and the reason is it's not exactly uncorrelated to stocks and bonds, but it's semi-correlated. It's got a pretty good yield, generally speaking. Over the last 20 years, it's been the number one asset class 3 or 4 times, and it's also a good inflation protection. So I think 10% of your financial assets in such a product makes a world of sense.
I recently read one of your posts, John, talking about annuities. And I think the article talked about how perhaps you could consider annuitizing 30% of your liquid assets at age 65, then perhaps another third or so at age 75. Have you considered annuities yet? And do you have a sense of where they fit into your long-term income plan?
Yeah, that was based on Fred Batiste, the actuary from Morneau Chappelle. I think he recently retired, although he's still writing for, I think, the Globe of late. And he's the same age as me. In fact, I think we were born one day apart in 1953 in April. And I think he does not have a defined benefit pension plan. And I have a little one, but nothing to speak of. So he's clearly worried about stock market risk. It's great if you have a defined benefit inflation index government guaranteed by taxpayers pension plan, like the civil servants do and teachers and other fortunate people. But for the most part, a lot of people, the rest of us don't. If you have an RSP, Moshe Milevsky wrote a book called Pensionize Your Nest Egg, and he talks in there about a real pension. And essentially, that's what pensionize your nest egg really just means what you asked me, annuitizing. So in the case of Fred Batiste, he's saying at age 65, if you have mostly of your assets in an RSP, ultimately a RIF, and maybe TFSA and non-registered, you want to take down some of that stock market risk. So he suggested annuitizing 30% of your RSP at age 65, if that's the age you're going to go. And then at age 70, this is assuming that you've deferred your CPP and maybe your OAS to 70, so that's really another annuity. So that's your second batch of annuities is age 70. And then the third batch is like at age 65, when you turn 75, Batiste would take another 30% of what's left in your RIF by then, annuitize that. Now, classically, a lot of people suggest that you shouldn't annuitize anyway to your 70s because interest rates are so low now. You get more longevity credits if you wait later, and there's not that much need. But I found Batiste's idea interesting. Have I done it myself? Not yet. However, my wife, we were asking for a bunch of quotes on annuities the other day on behalf of my wife. So we're getting that close to exact, at least starting to analyze and get a few quotes. Whether we actually hit the road and do it, probably a year or two away.
So you mentioned in that annuity example, taking CPP and OAS at age 70. Forgetting about the annuity example, in general, what are your thoughts on when to take CPP and OAS?
Well, I wrote a piece. I took OAS actually last year when I turned 65. My financial advisor saw it as sort of a hedge. So there's a difference with OAS, as you know, you can get clawed back at age 71. I think if your RIF or your RSP is much beyond $1 million, you're sort of in the OAS clawback zone, depending on the other sources of income. Whereas CPP will not be clawed back like the OAS. So to me, I'd rather have 5 or 6 years of, for sure, I'm getting the OAS not clawed back because I'm going to be in a lower tax bracket post-employment, post-age 60, and pre the RIF when you're forced to withdraw a RIF. So that, to me, you have clear sailing. There's 5 or 6 years, no question, you're going to get OAS to the max. After that, it gets a little dicey. The other thing is CPP, you're on a bigger base. So let's assume you don't have the pension envy. You don't have the big defined benefit government inflation index one that some people enjoy. What's the closest thing to that? CPP. CPP has twice a bigger base, almost, compared to OAS. Plus, if you wait for CPP to 70, it's, I think, a 42% boost compared to taking it at 65, whereas OAS is only a 36% boost. So when you add in those 2 or 3 things, plus the concept of a hedge, like who knows when I'm going to live, how long I'm going to live, then why not go for the OAS now, 65, and wait as long as humanly possible for CPP? I mean, I'm going to be 66 in a couple of months. I haven't yet taken CPP, but that was easy because my wife had a pretty good salary, which ends as of July. At that point, come back to me and maybe I will be starting to annuitize via early CPP.
As you know, for covering, mutual funds for all these years for the Financial Post and other publications, there are now many more ETFs than mutual funds. Do you think ETFs have made it easier or harder for people to manage their investments?
Well, there are particular ETFs that make it a lot easier. You may know PWL has been part of the ETF All-Stars I do every year for Money Sense. Last year, when Vanguard, almost exactly a year ago, last February, announced these 3 asset allocation ETFs. And to me, that's like as easy as it gets. It's low cost, 22 beeps or so. They have 3 choices. So the middle of the road one is VBAL. It's basically 60-40 stocks and bonds. And I say to my wife, who's not as interested in investing as us 3, if I were in the untimely event of my passing, I would feel comfortable saying, just put it all in VBAL or a robo-advisor or, somebody like you, a fee-based advisor who uses ETFs as the underlying. They're all doing much the same thing. Even Vanguard sounds like a one-ticket solution, but that's like several thousand securities, asset classes in all geographies, the fixed income in U.S. and foreign markets hedged back into the Canadian dollar. I'm not sure that they have as much real estate as we talked about, but other than that, you're getting a lot done. So if you don't want to do this stuff, something like a robo-advisor or an asset allocation ETF makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, iShares just came out with a couple of comparable products as well with a slightly lower fee. So that area of the product space is really starting to blossom in Canada.
Well, we're going to have to examine that for the next All-Stars.
Yeah.
I can't even keep up with all this stuff.
Well, nobody can. I mean, there are way more ETFs globally than there are stocks. Way more. It's not even comparable.
Which is nuts. And that's what happened with mutual funds as well.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about annuities, and we've talked a little bit about CPP and OAS, which are related to this question. Do you worry about inflation now that you're in your victory lap phase?
Well, I've always worried a little bit about inflation. So again, the CPP and OAS are both inflation indexed. That's nice. What I notice about my little corporate pensions is they're not inflation indexed. And so you notice that. The asset classes, again, Swenson talked about real estate as an asset class of inflation indexing, which is stocks themselves, of course, are inflation hedge in my view. And I've always been also a 10% gold kind of guy, gold and precious metals. Hasn't been and then the other asset class, which another one that Swenson emphasizes on the fixed income side, is TIPS in States, real return bonds in Canada, which are inflation indexed, or real return bonds.
Yeah.
What a CHIP stands for, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. You could argue about what percentage and how much should be in the US and in Canada. But to me, if you add up all that, real estate, CPP and OAS, gold and tips and stocks, well, that's not bad.
It's true.
It could always go to deflation, in which case we're talking a whole different scenario.
Yeah, can never predict the future. I think stocks haven't been a good hedge in the sense that they don't necessarily move with inflation, but they have over the long term outperformed inflation, which makes them, if you're in stocks for the long term, you're probably going to have a pretty good real outcome.
Yeah, I always feel comfortable with U.S. Quality dividend-paying stocks that keep growing their dividend. What they call them, the dividend aristocrats. You can find ETFs that are dividend aristocrat funds, and these are companies that over 25 years have kept on boosting their payout every year, which bonds don't do. So that's another way that ETFs have made things a little easier for investors.
So, John, I've been following you, as you know, since the early 90s in the Financial Post, and I'm really curious to ask you a question about investor behavior based on the media. And you have to come up with a story, a certain period of time for your editors. And can you talk about what you think the impact is, where perhaps the best thing is to not touch your portfolio, but when you have to put a story out there for readers, can you talk about what your thoughts are about the role of media in investor behavior?
Well, when I was a young reporter at the Globe and later in the Post, not so young, my personal motto was a story a day keeps the editor away. I never liked to be told to go and chase a fire or go cover this thing at City Hall. I was interested at one time in tech, and that's what I want to do. So if I gave an editor a story every day without them asking, that would kept them off my back. Same thing in personal finance. I sort of took that attitude. The other thing, though, is when you're a staff columnist, one story begets the next. So if you're doing 3 times a week, which is a common frequency, the column you wrote on Monday can sometimes be turned into another column by Friday because readers give you ideas or sources say, oh, but did you think of this and this and this? So it's sort of this endlessly replicating series of columns. As a freelancer, now I write once in a blue moon for the Globe, monthly for Money Sense, monthly for Financial Post. Then you don't have that self-perpetuating column thing. So you're not quite so in such a privileged feedback position as a staff journalist. So it's getting tougher, but then I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to write 3 columns a week anymore anyway. That's my, what do we call it? My glide path.
You have a ton of credibility. You do now. I mean, I read your stuff and I'm sure thousands or more than thousands of people do. Do you feel a sense of responsibility to the Canadian investment community as a journalist with the kind of credibility that you have?
Sure. I mean, one reason I keep the Financial Independence Hub going, which is, you may know, that does daily content, a lot of it is guest bloggers. I know that whenever I write a piece or it goes on the Hub, I get emails from ordinary people. And I'm not going to be making money off these people. Half the time they're looking for an advisor, and I refer them to the guidance section in the Hub, where they can there's a big list of people who get financial independence. I believe PWL is part of that. So yes, that is, I mean, a little bit grandiose to say giving back, but I do feel a bit of a responsibility. But my predecessor at the Post, Bruce Cohen, was always sort of a resource to people and quite generous with his time. So I had a good example. So yeah, it's hard to get basically neutral, objective information if you're the average person in the street. I'm lucky enough that I could pick up the phone or more likely email and contact, if I had the time, 50 or more advisors who have a good track record. So that's sort of a privilege, and it's good to take that, make use of that privilege and let readers and the average person benefit from it to the extent I can. Mind you, I don't want to spend all day, fielding emails.
Right.
So each guest we have on, John, we always ask the following question. How do you, and now that you're on your victory lap, how do you measure success in your life going forward?
Well, I think success in your relationships. I mean, financial success is only one aspect of life. I mean, look, I can think of certain presidents of the United States who are financial success, and I don't consider them a human being successes. And there's many other examples. So I think, well, we know that John Bogle died quite recently. Remember the book he wrote, which was called Enough. I think there was some story, it was on Motley Fool the other day, about how some hedge fund manager had tons and tons of money, And he was telling this author that this hedge fund guy had made more money in the last couple hours than this other guy had written. It was Joseph Heller, the Catch-22, the author, than Heller had made in a lifetime of royalties from his books. And he says, does that bother you? And he says, no, because I've got something that hedge fund guy doesn't have. And what's that? Enough. So I think if you have enough money, that's what Findependence is, knowing when you have enough money. If you have enough of a satisfying main relationship, family relationships, second tier, third tier, as you go out, ripple through the community, your church, and the Rotary Club, and whatever else is in your life, that to me is success. And it's not measured, beyond a certain amount of money. I mean, what is it? Who needs more than, I don't know. Let's not get into how much you need to retire. But it doesn't have to be as much as some of these political people. Like, again, Howard Schultz at Starbucks. It's hard to believe a 65-year-old who's worth billions wants to put up with all this crap and run for president. But apparently that's what people do. And that tells you that money alone is not enough.
Right. It's a great answer to the question. All right, John. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, this was great.
Yes, John, thanks very much for joining us today. It was a really interesting interview, and I want to thank you for all the work and research you've done over the years. That has certainly been a benefit to, I know in our case, for advisors, but also for investors. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime. Glad to do it as my flight path heads down towards landing.